Yes, hello everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Like Liz said, we're going to be discussing diversity in Argentina, Ecuador, and India. And we'll be providing three different kind of perspectives on how you can look at diversity within these countries. And yeah, hopefully you'll be able to relate to different aspects of them and compare them to your experiences in the United States. For example, we're North Carolina. So for some quick introductions, my name is Kierra. I am in my senior year of college at UNC Chapel Hill. I'm studying global studies in Spanish. And yeah, I really enjoyed the majors. If you have any questions about UNC or college life in general, at the end, we'll have time for questions.
Hi, everyone. My name is Grace. I'm a junior at Carolina, so this is my third year. And like Kiera, I actually studied global studies and Spanish as well, and I really enjoy it. So feel free to ask any questions at the end if you'd like to hear more about it.
Hey everyone, I'm really excited to be here. I'm Gargi and I'm a first year student at UNC Chapel Hill, just like Kira and Grace. I am majoring in computer science, so if you have any questions about that or about college in general, feel free to ask at the end.
So we'll be discussing, like I said, Ecuador, Argentina, and India. So myself personally, I studied abroad in Argentina last summer for about 6 weeks, and you can see that on the map. It's on the South America one, the red dot, all the way to the bottom. And if you look at the other countries that we're discussing, you have Ecuador, which is more northwest of Argentina. Yeah, she's circling around that red dot as well. And then on the right side of the map, you have India. And you can kind of see where these different countries are relative to the United States and specifically North Carolina, where we are physically today.
So we have a quick game in the beginning. So we'll do one question at a time, and feel free to put your answers in the chat, or if you're watching on YouTube, feel free to put them in the chat over there. So our first question is, in what country are alfajores consumed?
So you can guess. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say there's three options, Argentina, Ecuador, and India. So whichever country you think it is, feel free to put it in the chat. All right, we have one Ecuador.
Any other guesses? See a couple of Argentinas.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that was good guessing on your part because the answer is Argentina. I don't know if Kira wants to add anything about that, but Argentina is where they're consumed.
Yes, that was one of the, I guess you can call them desserts or pastries there that a lot of people have. You can find them at gas stations, supermarkets, pretty much anywhere. They're pretty popular.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for sharing that. So the next question is, in which country is the national bird the peacock? So again, the three options are Argentina, Ecuador, and India. Okay, I see India and Ecuador as some of the guesses. Yeah, well, it is India. India has the peacock as the national bird, and you can often see it like trying to fly. They can't fly really well, but they're very beautiful birds. So, yeah. The next question is, which country is small in its population and it borders Peru and Colombia? Okay, Ecuador. I see multiple Ecuadors. That's true, it is Ecuador. I don't know if Grace wants to add anything, but the answer is Ecuador. For the next question, Sanskrit was the first language of this country. Which country is this? I see India from Miss Soda's class. Right, so it is India. That's a very good guess. I think if people are familiar with yoga, a lot of the chants and hymns are in Sanskrit. Our next question is, can you name some of the racial populations that make up Ecuador? So this is not like a multiple choice question, but it's more of thinking about the population in Ecuador. Can you talk about, or can you list any of the different races of people that live in Ecuador? Mestizos, yeah. I think early South American.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah, so thank y'all for, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank y'all for those answers. So we'll be talking about this a little bit later, but there are lots of racial groups represented in Ecuador. So there are people of African descent, people of European descent, people of Asian descent, people of indigenous backgrounds, and also people who identify as multiracial, so having multiple heritages. So great job.
Yeah, perfect. The last question we have for you is, this country released the world's first feature-length animated movie in 1917. So which country was this? Again, the three choices would be Argentina, Ecuador, and India. I see Argentina. Okay, any other guesses? India. All right, well, the first guess was right. It is Argentina. I don't know if Kira wants to say anything about that, but they did release the first feature-length animated movie.
Yeah, it was, like I said in the picture, it was released in 1917. It was kind of a comedy or a parody based on one of the political leaders in the country at that time.
That's really cool. All right, so we have some preliminary questions for you just to get you thinking about the topics that we'll be talking about. So our first question is, what comes to mind when you think of diversity? I'm sure you've all heard in classrooms or just in conversations a lot about diversity. So what aspects of diversity come to mind? It can be relating to the US or like international as well. In the chat, a lot of different kinds of people with different beliefs. And that's true. I think diversity is synonymous with differences. And all of those differences in beliefs and in culture and in heritage kind of come together to create diversity. I think that kind of leads into our next question about the diversity that you experience in your life. So we all have multiple identities based on our different beliefs and different backgrounds. So, you can start thinking about what the different forms of diversity look like for you. Another answer in the chat says the United States of America comes to mind when you think of diversity, which is very true. Different cultures and beliefs. So surely we have like a lot of people from different countries and different backgrounds that make up the USA. So that's a great example of diversity. And also within North Carolina, whether it's in your classroom or in the people that you live with, what diversity and what examples of diversity do you see? Okay, so I think that kind of summed it up, different beliefs and cultures and backgrounds. Unless anybody else wants to add anything, I think we can move on.
I see in the chat different kinds of food, so that's another good example.
Yeah, so thanks y'all for mentioning some of the different types of diversity that you can think of, especially in the United States. You have, someone said food, someone said religious beliefs, and I think these are all demonstrated in the countries that we're going to study today, as well as the United States and North Carolina. And so when you're thinking about cultural diversity, that's what I'm going to be focusing on. You can think of different traditions, from holidays to family practices, how your family values each other. You can also think about manners as well. So for example, in the United States, we might be very cognizant of time. So you might want to arrive on time to certain things as opposed to in other countries. it's more culturally acceptable to arrive late to things. And these are kind of demonstrated in all the countries that we're going to focus on today, but I'll be focusing on specific aspects of how culture is united with Argentina. And so similar to actually what Grace was mentioning earlier about the different racial makeup of Ecuador, Argentina is also actually quite diverse. In the beginning, it started with indigenous groups, and these are demonstrated in groups such as the Mapuche, Koya, Guarani, and more. And though they do tend to live in rural areas, they also do inhabit cities as well as the suburbs as well. And this video that we're going to watch demonstrates the Koya period, or the Koya people. And so as you can see in the video, she is raising llamas actually. So that's kind of her culture in the sense that she's from a rural area and that's how she defines her daily life. So we'll see that demonstrated in the video.
And Maria to leave. Nellie will stay for 2 more days. Her husband, like Beto, works in the mines for 20 days at a time. Her children live in the village of El Moreno. The llamas are heading out to graze in the pasture. Nellie just points them in the right direction, and they go off on their own. The llamas will return after sunset.
So yeah, very short and sweet, but it does demonstrate one of the ways that indigenous people might go about their lives. And it kind of makes me think of farmers in the United States, for example, who raise their cattle on open pasture, and they're able to take their dogs and lead them to different areas to graze on the grasslands. So that's kind of one of the connections between indigenous stories and their culture to the United States. And then another aspect of Argentina as well is actually the large population of Italian immigrants. So between 1870 and 1960, approximately 2 million Italians immigrated to Argentina. And this drastically changed the demographics of the country for years to come. And today, over 30 million people in Argentina claim some kind of Italian heritage, and this makes up nearly 2/3 of the total population. And one of the ways that this is kind of demonstrated in Argentine culture is through the food. So we mentioned food earlier is definitely a huge aspect of what makes up a country and its culture. And in the picture you see here, it's called milanesa in Spanish. I can't remember what it is in Italian, but basically you take a meat, usually beef or venison or something, and then you can kind of flatten it and you cook it and fry it. And so when I was specifically in the capital city of Buenos Aires living with a host mom. She made me that and it was very delicious. And another way that you can kind of see that Italian influence is with the hand gestures. So many of them will kind of use this hand gesture when they're speaking. It definitely comes from Italy, or you'll hear people say ciao, which is actually an Italian word, when they're saying goodbye to someone instead of adios. So these are some of the ways that you'll see the Italian influence in the country of Argentina, because such a large population of the people do have that those ancestors from Italy. And so another aspect of culture, you can kind of connect it actually with your geography. So similar to the video we saw earlier with the Koya woman, the geography of her, where she lived, greatly impacted the way that she practiced her culture. And so in the pictures you see here, you can have city life, for example, the one demonstrated at the bottom left. That's one of the cities in Argentina called Mar del Plata. And that's a very big beach region. Lots of people go there, especially during the summers, to have fun on the beach. And so you can kind of see how that aspect of their life is dedicated to being able to walk to the beach every day. If we want to contrast that to the picture in the top left corner, which is very southern region of Argentina, where it's very cold, and you can see the glaciers here, and the people who live here have to adjust to the changing temperatures quite often, the degree to which it's so cold, and they might have to change their fashion, for example. So instead of wearing shorts and flip-flops, they might wear very heavy coats to keep them warm. And another aspect of geography and culture is actually, they're called, well, in English, they're called cowboys, but in Spanish is gauchos. And their life is pretty much dedicated to raising cattle. And you can see that demonstrated in the video, which we will watch a clip of. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Cowboy life has, in the countryside of Argentina, cowboy life has scarcely changed over the past 3 centuries. The gaucho is a hero here, a legendary figure, larger than life. But these are the real gauchos, men who still live this life, the way of the gaucho. If there is such a thing as a classic gaucho, it is Don Jose Anzola. He believes solitude helps preserve the first form of gaucho life.
Si no pudiera vivir en el campo.
If I couldn't live in the campo, the countryside, an unthinkable thought. I don't know what I'd do. I'd rather live in a shack out here than in a palace in the city. There's too much I'd miss. The sound of hoofbeats, the birds at dawn, sipping mate in the clean air. No city has that.
Yes, you can see clearly the different ways that being a gaucho affected this man's life. He clearly loves the countryside, being out in nature. He said drinking mate, so that's another aspect of Argentine culture. It's tea that you kind of drink out of a gourd. I don't have it on me right now, but you put the tea leaves in the gourd and you pour hot water over it. And actually you could see that in the video as well. But yeah, you can see the different ways that geography, depending on where you're from, will affect the way that your daily life is carried out and the things that you care about most with regards to your culture. And so the final aspect of culture, there's so many aspects that can be discussed, but I'll just focus on sports culture. So I know in the United States, very big sports culture. Most of us really like basketball or American football, but the biggest sports in Argentina is clearly soccer or football in Spanish. And so the country itself is actually very good. They've won a couple of World Cups, as well as within the country, they have professional clubs. And there's a very big, I guess you can call it a rivalry, similar to UNC versus Duke, actually a little more intense, between the two soccer clubs in the left picture. And they have these fans, are called Barra Brava. And they're very intense fans. It gets pretty violent actually, but yeah, people have a lot invested into their sports teams they really love, the soccer teams that they really love, and you'll see people crowded around TVs when the game is on to make sure they catch all the highlights that the players do when they're playing soccer. And then other sports that you'll find is rugby and polo. I was actually able to go watch a rugby game when I was down in Buenos Aires. It's similar to football, but they have much less protective gear. And there are other rules as well that come along with it. And then, finally it comes down to the polo teams. There are obviously other sports in the country as well, but polo is one of the, I guess you can call it traditional sports that is played. And it was brought over actually by the Europeans that colonized the country. So yeah, there's different ways that you can kind of create connections between the United States and its culture, specific sports culture, and Argentina and its sports culture. So there's also similarities between the two countries.
Hi, everybody. So I'll be talking about racial diversity in Ecuador. I was in Ecuador from January to mid-March of this year. Unfortunately, I had to leave a little bit early due to kind of global happenings with the coronavirus. But I really enjoyed my time while I was there, and I really appreciated some of the research I got to do regarding language and race in Ecuador. And so here are just some photos to kind of speak towards the representation and also different groups that are in Ecuador. So there are Afro-Ecuadorians, there are Ecuadorians of African descent, there are also Ecuadorians who are of indigenous descent, and as well as Ecuadorians who identify as European or white, Ecuadorians who are from different parts of Asia, and then of course people who identify as multiracial or coming from multiple heritages in Ecuador. And so Ecuador is a smaller country, but that should not be conflated with their social diversity. There are lots of different people in Ecuador, so it is a smaller country, but there are lots of different people moving around from different backgrounds, which is really important to consider because when I went to Ecuador, I had some understandings of different people who might live there, but once I got there, I got to meet a lot of different Ecuadorians from different backgrounds, and that really showcased for me how important it is to think about diversity, specifically in a racial sense, in Latin America, specifically in Ecuador. And so Ecuador has multiple racial groups represented in their population. And so as I was saying earlier, there are Ecuadorians of African descent, of European descent, Asian descent. There are indigenous Ecuadorians as well. And then there are people who identify as having multiple heritages. Something interesting to consider is that as of 2020, about 71% of Ecuadorians identified as being of both indigenous Ecuadorian descent and European descent, specifically from places like Italy, actually, as Kierra spoke about a little bit earlier. And so that's important to keep in mind too, is that there aren't, with there being so many identities, just like in the United States, there are a lot of different racial groups. It's important to consider how people are being treated, and also the ways people are understanding and considering race in regards to their own identities in their own lives. And so again, kind of just thinking about understanding racial diversity and why it's important. There's some key ideas for me thinking about: one, representation and equity. I can't necessarily recall a time in my own life where I got to see necessarily people specifically from Ecuador represented on TV. However, when I would speak to some of my friends, when I was studying abroad at university in Ecuador, something that I learned that was really interesting is that in terms of representation, not everybody is necessarily represented in the same way. And so when I would speak to some of my friends who are Afro-Ecuadorian, they would talk about how, in some respects, they wish that there was more representation of Black people in, or more representation of indigenous people in Ecuador in television or in movies. And so that's something really important to consider, because when I went there initially, I didn't necessarily have that perspective of all the racial diversity that was in Ecuador. So I couldn't necessarily understand or appreciate the fact that in some cases, in terms of representation or in terms of equity, there were multiple different groups of people and different people having different needs in regards to how they were being understood racially. And something else that's important to consider too is dismantling stereotypes. Something I've noticed as someone from the United States is thinking about how certain people, again, are represented. And so personally on TV or in movies, I never really necessarily saw too many representations or too many perspectives coming from Black Ecuadorians or Black South Americans or people with darker skin speaking about their experience as Ecuadorians or South Americans. And so that also helped me to dismantle or kind of take apart my own stereotypes. I think sometimes when we think of a place, maybe a place we haven't been to, we might see a certain vision or a certain person or a certain representation might come to mind because that's what we've been exposed to. However, studying abroad allowed me to start to work through some of those stereotypes and learn about other people and their experiences. And as well as thinking about how people are treated based on their racial identity. Historically, so non-white Ecuadorians, so these might be people who are African Ecuadorian, Indigenous Ecuadorian, Asian Ecuadorian, have experienced discrimination based on their race. This is something that I learned through research, specifically talking to different groups of people when I was in Ecuador. And this can also be true for Ecuadorians who have darker skin tones. This is something that I've also witnessed in my own life as somebody who's of African descent in the United States. And so again, having a perspective on racial diversity was really helpful to me as studying abroad, because it helped me think in a larger perspective about the different kinds of people in Ecuador, just like the different kinds of people in the United States, and how race might be a factor in how they're treated, and things I can do, and things I can consider as I'm thinking about how people can be represented fairly and in an equitable way. So that was really helpful for me to think about while I studied abroad.
All right, well, thanks, Kira and Grace, for amazing presentation. It's going to be hard to follow that up, but I'll be talking about language diversity in India now. And there's a lot of diversity in India in different aspects, but I'm going to be focusing on languages and what they mean for culture in India. All right, so just to start us off with kind of a thought-provoking question, which languages do you speak? And feel free to drop them in the chat, or just, think about them in your head. Count how many languages you speak. But yeah.
And these could be languages you speak at home, or languages you're learning at school, or languages you speak with other family members. I see English, Latin, and Spanish.
All right.
Spanish, English, and French. Marathi, German. You guys are learning a lot of different languages.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of diverse languages. That's great. All right, well, keep those in mind. We'll see if you can see any of those in the languages we'll talk about. Okay, so just starting off, I just wanted to give a bit of an introduction about India. The capital city is Delhi. The main languages, or the official languages that the government uses, are Hindi and English. But there are 22 total recognized languages in the Constitution. And these are generally, each state has a different language. It has a very big population, as you can see, and it gained independence from British rule in 1947. Geographically speaking, India is also very diverse. It's called a subcontinent because it has a variety of different geographic features, like Himalayan mountains, the plains, a desert, and islands. And there's just another few fun facts about how it's the largest democracy, and it's very large by land area as well. So looking more into the languages that are spoken in India, the map on the left kind of shows you the division of the main languages spoken in different areas. So you can see that the bright red portion in the middle, there's a lot of Hindi spoken in the central Indian area. But then when you go further south, you see that there are different languages like Gujarati, Marathi, Telugu, Kannada, Tamil, and others. This kind of shows you that there's a lot of people in the kind of the central part of India that speak Hindi, which is why it's one of the official languages used by the government. But a lot of people in southern India don't usually speak Hindi. And for this reason, English is also an official language recognized by the government. So all official communication happens in both languages, English and Hindi. Moving to the right, there's just a graph showing you the number of speakers of each language. Huge numbers because India has a very large population, but again, Hindi is spoken by the most people, followed by Bengali, Telugu, and Marathi. The languages that are detailed here are kind of the official state languages, but there are also several hundred other languages spoken by smaller communities of people within these states. A lot of them are kind of related to each other, but they're all recognized as distinct languages. And currently there are 415 living languages that are listed for India. So diving a little bit into the cultural aspect of language, Sanskrit is really important language when it relates to Indian culture, especially relating to Hinduism and kind of ancient texts. A lot of the ancient texts and chants and hymns in the Vedas, they're all in Sanskrit. So Sanskrit is a language that's been preserved for many years, and it's very important to the culture of many Indians. On the left, there's a quote, a very long quote by Sir William Jones in 1786. And I won't read it to you, but he's basically talking about how Sanskrit is a very ancient language with kind of a very well-defined set of grammar and well-defined structure. And it also shows a lot of similarities to languages like Latin and Greek. And that indicates that maybe they were all derived from a single common source, which might not exist now, but it might have existed in the past. So on the bottom, you see the table with some Sanskrit words, which are compared to English and Latin words. And I put that there because it's really intriguing how similar some of the words are. So for example, for the word mother or mater in Latin, there's an equivalent called mater, which all of those mean mother. Similarly for father, there's pitar in Sanskrit, which is similar to pater in Latin. In Sanskrit, the word for no is na. Similarly, the word for door is dvar, and the word for time is kal, which is similar to calendar. So these are just a few examples, but they show that these languages might have come from a similar source. And then finally, on the right top corner, there was a picture of the alphabet. Sorry. Yeah, that's just showing the script of Sanskrit. And my final slide is relating to what language and language instruction looks like today in India. Obviously, with having different languages for each state, there's a lot of variety and a lot of diversity in how language is taught in the classroom. Now, in recent times, there's been an increase in English medium schools, so schools that teach entirely in English. But in different states, they have their own curriculum relating to language. So for example, I stayed in Maharashtra for a few years while I was growing up, and it's a state in the western part of India. And in that place, Marathi is spoken primarily, so Marathi is a local language. So in my school, we had English as our first language of instruction, Hindi as another language that was taught, and Marathi as the local language that was taught. So when you look at like schools around India, mostly English and Hindi are either mandatorily taught or they're primarily taught, but you can also see local languages like in Maharashtra, Marathi would be taught. In the South, maybe Tamil or Telugu would be taught in the classroom. So it's really interesting to see how different schools have different languages depending on where they're situated geographically.
Okay, so that actually just wraps up our presentation. We do have a couple assessment questions to see what are all the things that y'all learned today. So the first question is between 1870 and 1960, Argentina received large amounts of immigrants from which country? The options are Germany, Italy, South Korea, or Spain.
Official languages does India have? So 1, 13, 22, or 17? What percentage of Ecuadorians as of 2020 identify as having indigenous or European ancestry? So 12%, 71%, 30%, or 2%. And you guys can talk about it.
Okay. So I see a majority of people chose Italy for the first question. So that is well, okay, it does make sense that you chose Spain. Actually, all these different cultures and countries did immigrate to Argentina. Between that period of time, though, between 1870 and 1960, they experienced a majority coming from Italy. But all of them is true. There were a lot of Germans who immigrated, as well as actually Koreans and Chinese people as well, and Japanese. So the country does have a lot of diversity in that way. But yeah, during that period of time, it was mostly Italians who immigrated. And for the second question, it says, how many official languages does India have? Seeing a large mix of answers, but majority of people have said 22. Yeah, lots of languages that make up the country, and then all of these are just the official ones, but as Gargi mentioned earlier, there are hundreds that are also spoken within the region as well, which makes it so fascinating. So many languages out there to be learned if you're ever interested in learning a language. And the final question, what percentage of Ecuadorians as of 2020 identify as having indigenous and European ancestry? It seems like a pretty even split, actually, between 71% and 30%. But the answer is 71.
Good job, you guys. Thank you for your answers. Let me close down the poll. Okay.
And so just the final question that we have. So what are some elements of culture in Argentina, Ecuador, and India are similar or different to the United States? And yeah, you can feel free to put them in the chat, or if you're watching from YouTube, comment there as well. Yeah, we mentioned several elements. We mentioned different aspects of culture. So I talked about culture, we spoke about languages, and we also spoke about racial diversity. But feel free to point out any other similarities or differences that you saw during the presentation. And this can be to the United States, or it can be to your town specifically.
From Ms. Soto's class, languages, sports are the same, food is different. So they also, like we saw, and they play soccer in Argentina as well as in the US. There's some rugby played in the US, not maybe as much as in Argentina. A little bit of polo maybe played here, but not too much. Good. Some of the food is different.
Yeah, myself being a foodie, I always enjoy comparing the different types of food cultures between countries, and seeing the different ways that they, or the same, for example, if people are more interested in sweet breakfasts versus ones that are heavy. So United States, if you kind of think of a typical breakfast, you might think like IHOP with pancakes, eggs, sausage, something like that. But at least for me, when I was in Argentina, they don't really eat scrambled eggs very much for breakfast, and I was missing that a lot.
Yep. Yeah, some other similarities you can also think between North Carolina. So I think of maybe North Carolina and Ecuador in terms of there's a lot of racial diversity in the state of North Carolina as well. We have some indigenous peoples, Lumbee tribe, Eastern Band of Cherokee, people of European descent, Latinos. We have people of African American descent, Asian descent.
Well, yeah, well, thanks everyone for participating. We'll each just kind of give our closing statements about our countries. So yeah, there's so many ways that you can think of diversity in terms of a country. You can think of it in terms of culture. So we spoke about sports and race and geography and all these different intersectionalities between the different aspects of a culture. Yeah, it really makes a country's history very rich. And that's why I'm always so fascinated to learn about the history of a country and yeah, just the daily life of people as well. And I didn't mention earlier, but memes, for example, are a great way to see what's trending in a country, what people are laughing at, to get to know a country more.
I can go next, just thinking I really enjoyed being in Ecuador and getting to hear about different people's experiences, kind of also analyze my own experiences as a Black person in Ecuador. And it just really opened opened my mind and also helped me consider all the different people that might be from a place. Sometimes through media, or through certain books, it's not always easy to see the kind of full-fledged racial diversity of a place and all those people, but it is so important. And so that was really great for me to get to kind of learn about even deeper, already having sort of thoughts about it in the United States and getting to see it in another country as well.
Yeah, I think both of you covered it really well. Thinking about India, we talked about languages primarily today, and touched a little bit on kind of his history and literature in terms of Sanskrit. And also we finished with talking about education and how different languages are taught in different places depending on geography, kind of where you are in the country. So I hope you learned a little bit about India and about all the other countries as well. And I hope we left you with a different perspective on diversity for all these 3 countries.
All right, so sorry, I was trying to get a slide back for somebody that wanted a photo of it. I think this is the one. In a moment, we're going to move on to our Q&A, a question and answer. So we have about 12 minutes to answer some questions. And these could be questions about diversity, about the presentation. They could be any questions that you want to know about anything about Argentina, Ecuador, or India. So it could be about sports or food or these students' experiences when they've gone abroad, or you can ask them about going to UNC, or you can ask them about going abroad. So really any questions. So I'll go to our Q&A slide real quick, and you can type your questions either into the Q&A in Zoom, into the chat in Zoom, or into the chat in YouTube. So I'll unshare the screen in a moment. But again, any questions about the presentation, studying abroad, or college. And while we're waiting for questions, if you guys want, you can talk a little bit about how you went abroad, if it was with family, if it was through UNC, if you applied for any scholarships. But if you want to tell us a little bit about your experiences in that aspect, we can do that. And then, yeah, someone asked the question, can you talk about how a student can study in another country? So maybe Kierra and Grace, if you guys want to talk about that.
Yeah, so at least through UNC, you apply to a particular program. So you would first, I guess you can choose the country or the region that you're interested in, and then look for a particular program that either UNC offers or another university offers as well. Yeah, and that's like the application part is kind of self-explanatory, but when it comes to actually preparing for the country, I watched a lot of YouTube videos and read up a lot and just kind of looked into a lot of information just about the country, Argentina itself, looking at their tipping culture, for example. So in the States, you kind of like leave the money on the table and you give a certain percentage. And I'm pretty sure we did that in country, and well, you didn't really leave money on the table. Most people kind of pay with cards, actually. But yeah, and they typically didn't, they always wanted to combine the check, which would kind of get on my nerves. So I was eating with other people. So we would have to work out between the group, myself and my friends, who's gonna pay for what with the little bit of cash that we actually had. So those are some of the ways you can kind of prepare for going to a country. I'm sure Grace can offer more information as well.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I echo a lot of that. I would say looking at your school or maybe an outside organization that facilitates studying abroad for students. In my case, I'm on a scholarship at UNC, so I also collaborated with our financial aid office just to think about which programs made the most sense for me, and how I could. In my case, I was able to use some of that money that that I use at Carolina also abroad. So that was also helpful in terms of figuring out how to facilitate that. But yeah, just kind of thinking about where you might want to go, doing some research, like Kierra said, is really helpful to get a perspective of how you might operate in another place versus maybe how you do or don't operate in certain respects wherever you're coming from. And so I think those are all awesome things to consider if you're thinking about how to study abroad as a student.
Yeah, and you can think about if you speak another language, if you want to go to a country where that language is spoken, um, or sometimes there's many programs where you don't need to speak another language as well, where they speak other languages or where English is the main language. And also UNC has a lot of scholarships you can apply for in addition to that financial aid to help pay for your programs. And there are some programs where it costs the same amount to study abroad as it does to study at UNC. I know there's a UNC program in Mexico that's the same. So those are a couple things. But you guys want to add anything else?
Yeah, just to add on to what everyone said, even if you want to study abroad for a year before you join UNC, there's a global gap year fellowship at UNC that, offers you financial support to study abroad. I know one of our peers in the program did that. So that's also a great opportunity for someone who's coming in to UNC.
Yep, so you can take the option of going abroad for a year in between high school and college. We have an intern and another student that did a global gap year, and sometimes for those global gap years it's one country, or sometimes you go to multiple countries within that year that you're abroad. Someone also asked, how long do you feel is a good length of time to get a feeling for a country? So you guys can talk about how long you were there, if you wish you had been there longer, or if shorter would have been enough. I know most people would wish they could have stayed longer, but you can go ahead and share what you think.
Yeah, definitely for me, I would have loved to stay longer. So I was only there for 6 weeks during the summertime. And then the program, so I went there to learn how to speak. I spoke Spanish beforehand, but to get better at speaking it. And I was with a bunch of Americans. So the whole time we were speaking English, which was not helpful. So I'll definitely say choose your program, choose one that's challenging, but also that you're comfortable with, that yeah, if you're going there for a language, that you're going to speak the language for the majority of the time. I was speaking with my host mom as well, but I would have loved to stay there at least a semester to really get to know the country more, because I was only in the city of Buenos Aires. And we did a small trip to Uruguay for about a weekend. But yeah, for me personally, especially if you're going for a language, I would say a semester, if you can.
Yeah, I initially intended to be in Ecuador for the full spring semester. However, that had to change. And so I definitely wish I had been there longer. However, I would say I felt like my experience was pretty, I guess, immersive, you could say. And so I spoke Spanish most of the day with my host mom. All of my university classes were also in Spanish. And I would take my commute, get on the bus. And I also had some good opportunities to travel outside of Quito, which is the city where I was in, to other like beaches and like the countryside. And so I would say that while I definitely would have wanted to stay there longer, I feel that I got to kind of get like a glimpse. And I hope to visit again when it's possible.
And I would say that anytime, even if it's a short period of time, is better than none at all. So there are summer programs, there's semester programs, and there's year-long programs. I think most people, once they get there, wish they could stay longer. But I wouldn't say to that you should let it dissuade you to go if you can only go for a short period of time. Still definitely do it, and then maybe the next time you go, you can go for even longer. I studied abroad in France in undergrad for 1 semester, so from January to May, and I wish I could have gone for a whole year. And my classes were all in French and Spanish, but my program did not require you to speak French. You could take all your classes in English if you wanted to. And I actually studied abroad through a different university. So I went to the University of Michigan, but I ended up studying abroad through Michigan State University. So the University of Michigan only had either you could go for 1 full year or a summer, but they didn't offer the semester. So I found another school's program to go for the semester. I couldn't go for the full year in terms of finishing all my credits for my major and minor in time. So that's another thing you take into consideration when you choose the length of your program, is how many credits might transfer back that you're able to take while you're there. Any other questions? Those are great questions about going abroad. And Gargi, I know you were in India for a long time, so I don't know if you want to speak any to that at all.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, my experience is very different from everyone else's because I didn't go through the school. I moved to India with my family when I was like 10 years old, and I moved back when I was 16. So I stayed for 6.5, 7 years, and I still feel that wasn't enough. So, I mean, you'd always wish to, stay for longer, but yeah, I think just growing up there was very transformative in terms of allowing me to experience a lot of what being in India is like. So I thought that it was a great experience for me personally. And I hope to go back or to go to another country in my time at Carolina.
Good. Any final questions? We can stay on for another minute or so and see if you guys think of anything else that you want to ask us. I know some people had to go to their next class period, but they said thank you. Someone said, this is great. Will you do more like this in the future? So to answer that question, we typically have a virtual cultural festival like this twice a year, once each semester. So we do one in November, which is the one right now. Typically we do it during International Education Week. That's the middle of November, but since the UNC semester is shortened or different this year, we did it a little bit early. So our next virtual cultural festival will probably be either the end of March or the first week of April. We don't always decide the date until January because we have to run the date by the students that we're working with that semester and make sure that it works with their schedule. And we do have a lot more of these past presentations recorded on our YouTube channel and our website. So if you want to watch, they aren't live, but if you want to watch some that are recorded, you can watch those. And then someone said, well, email us again when you set the date. Yes. And so I would recommend signing up for our email list, which I can put a link to that in the chat. We only send out an email once a month, and we let you know when the next festival will be. And we also post it on our social media sites. So I'll put the link to sign up for our newsletter and our website in the chat, which most of you should have gotten to our website when you signed up. Well, thank you so much for everyone's participation. Thank you to our presenters and panelists, Kierra, Gargi, and Grace, for sharing all that great information with everyone. And we will be back at 2:30 for our last presentation of the day that's on global climate and the environment with presenters Sarah and Ava, who are two of our Navigators interns. So thank you again. Spread the word to other teachers about these presentations. We'd love to have them join us in the future. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.